I start from 50. So I have 1 hour. So when it starts at 4, so I have 50 minutes. And when it's that's fine. I can make it shorter. Yeah.
It's just that remember he's giving you a 3-minute.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that would help.
Well, that's not that actually the time for the control right.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan. Nice to meet you again. Yeah. So nice to meet you again. Oh yeah. I replied to you by email. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, really appreciate it. Wow. Yeah, sure. It's just feel, I'm feeling. Yeah. Really enjoy. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, David, I think we'll start very soon.
Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's sociology speaker series co-organized with ASEN, the Association for the Studies of Ethnicity and Nationalism. My name is Dongwei. I'm a third-year PhD student in sociology. It's my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Tanglong Wang. Dr. Wang received his PhD in sociology from here, University of Edinburgh in 2019, and has previously taught at the University of Hull and Birkbeck, University of London. He is a lecturer in sociology at University of Brighton, where he also serves as a course leader for sociology and criminology. Through his investigation of cultural, social, and political implication of the revival of Confucian's education in contemporary China, Dr. Wang's research contributes to several core areas in sociology, including race and ethnicity, international migration, and grassroots movements. He is the co-editor of Reconsidering Chinese Citizenship, Cultural Roots and Cultural Reach, and the author of The Rights of Confucian Citizens in China, Theoretical Reflections and Empirical Explorations, and Cultivating the Confucian Individual, the Confucian Education Revival in China. As a guest editor, Dr. Wang has successfully completed 3 spatial journal issues for citizenship studies, social transformations in Chinese studies, and China perspectives. Currently, he is editing a new spatial issue, Chinese Individuals in Dilemma, Rethinking China's Path to Individualization in the New Era for China Perspectives, and working on an edited volume Reinventing Confucian Education in Contemporary China for Routledge. These works addressed important issues such as cultural citizenship, educational reform, and the changing significance of Confucian principles in contemporary Chinese study. For the next 45 minutes or so, Dr. Wang will present his work about how Confucian education interweaves nationalism and cosmopolitanism to cultivate Chinese citizens with both a strong national identity and a global outlook. We will then open the floor for questions and comments from audience here and for those joining us online. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wang.
Thank you very much, Dongwei, for your introduction. Thank you, Lisa. Very, very happy to come back to University of Edinburgh, where I got my PhD. When I arrived here today, I look around in the George Square. I went to the building where the graduation ceremony took place, which reminds me the day in 2019 when I got my PhD as a graduation ceremony. A lot of beautiful memories. Really appreciate for the arrangement today, inviting me to talk about my research. So today, my topic is about nationalism and cosmopolitanism, how they are interweaved in the Confucian education revival in contemporary China, which is my long-term research interest. So why this? Yeah. So why this topic? I'd like to start from some of my publications in the past couple of years. So in this book is based on my PhD dissertation, where I talk about the rise of Confucian education, focusing on how the Confucian individuals are cultivated by reading classics. When I was doing this research, my PhD, my supervisor is Sophia, sitting there, and I'm very curious about how the subjectivity of people is formed, shaped, and reshaped by reading classics, Confucian classics and Western classics. And as part of it, I'm thinking about nationalism and cosmopolitanism. And then I published the second book, The Rise of Confucian, where I explore this topic directly. I published a couple of articles focusing on nationalism and cosmopolitanism in Confucian education. And I developed that idea and make it part of this second book. So this is what I'm going to introduce to you today. And my research actually is still ongoing. So the book on the right is going to publish this month, where I edited this book with colleagues. I'm thinking about how to reconsider Chinese citizenship from the cultural perspectives. Particularly, from my personal interest, I'm thinking about how Confucianism may contribute to citizens and citizenship in the contemporary Chinese context. So when I'm talking about, that means when I'm talking about nationalism and and cosmopolitanism in the cultivation of Confucian citizens. So I'm talking about that. So the subjects as citizens in Confucianism through reading classics. So this is why I'm going to talk about this topic today. I think I need to use this one. Yeah. So, cheers, Lisa. When I'm thinking about the Confucianism, nationalism, and cosmopolitanism, I review the literature. I find that there are actually two perspectives to look at how Confucianism may contribute to either nationalism or cosmopolitanism. I summarize them as external and internal perspectives. So from external perspectives, here I give you a list of points. Their points basically are looking at how Confucianism, how the Chinese government, the CCP, for example, are making use of Confucianism to shape and reshape the nationalism, the ideology, or how to shape people's national identity, something like that. So Confucianism is actually used as an instrument by the power to shape and reshape people's national and cosmopolitan, particularly national identity. But there is actually another perspective, that is internal perspective, which is contributed by Confucian philosophers, historians, Confucian studies, scholars. So here I give you 3 points here. They argue that we need to look inside the Confucianism to look at how Confucianism may contribute to either nationalism and cosmopolitanism. That means we need to go back to reconsider Confucianism. Maybe we need to get rid of the prejudice about Confucianism, which regard Confucianism as ideology against the globalization, or against the considering Confucianism as the ideology that goes against the individuality, individual values, something like that. So that means we need to reconsider Confucianism and how Confucianism may contribute to nationalism and cosmopolitanism. So I'd like to mention this point, which is my research published a couple of years ago. In this article, I talk about how Confucianism, in the Confucian education that is reviving in contemporary China, how the national identity is constructed when I explore this topic by looking at the children, the parents, and teachers when they are reading classics, Confucian classics. But this research is mainly talking about the national identity making. Instead of, it does not give a lot attention to the cosmopolitan orientation in the Confucian education. So we really need to, I told myself I really need to look at the both. Why? I will explain later. So, but before that, I need to clarify my research questions. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk about 2 research questions, interrelated research questions. The first research question is about theory. Okay, I'm looking at the Confucian education revival. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the grassroots Confucian education revival, which means the Confucian education activity that are taking place within the grassroots society, involving the ordinary people instead of the political power or the cultural elites. Okay, so I'm talking about that kind of grassroots Confucian education. But when I'm looking at this phenomena, there is always a body of literature about the educational theory of Confucian education. I really need to explore that. So, and that body of literature also gives me a lot of insights about how to understand the nationalism and cosmopolitanism in Confucian education. So this is the first question. The second question I'm talking about is empirical research question, which means I need to, I will present a lot of empirical data from my field work to show you how the students, teachers, maybe they, within Confucian school, they practice, how they do nationalism and cosmopolitanism within the school field. So the 2 research questions I'm going to explore. But I think it was not necessary to talk about what nationalism and cosmopolitanism do I mean. Okay, when we are talking about nationalism, that's, from the European intellectual tradition, it's very easy to relate it to the nationalist movements in the past century, involving the World War II and related to post-colonialism. But I'm not talking about nationalism from that perspective. I'm talking about nationalism from China's perspective. So what do I mean by that? So when we are looking at nationalism, or Chinese nationalism, we really need to consider this concept, Chinese culturalism. And then we are going to talk about Chinese nationalism, which is a modern form of Chinese culturalism. I will explain the two terms first. So in terms of the Chinese culturalism, here is a very brief introduction of it. It is related to a kind of 天下 or the under heaven conception. That means China is historically is viewed in the middle of the 天下. Just like the China in Chinese is 中国, so it's the central country, right? So this is one point of it. And the second point is, historically, in terms of Chinese culturalism, Confucianism or Confucian culture, Confucian values, they are considered universally applicable and morally superior. And thirdly, so when we are talking about Chinese culturalism, it actually has contributed to building up the political and cultural hierarchy, with Chinese culture viewed as superior and morally instructive to other cultures. It has nothing to do, it's different from the colonialism or nationalism, which means the Western power, they use the force, okay? But in terms of Confucianism, it's more about the culture and education and cultivation. It's more about that. But we cannot deny this kind of hierarchy, political and cultural hierarchy here. I'm not saying that in Chinese history there's no war. I'm not saying that. But in terms of Confucianism, this kind of cultural perspective is very important to understand culturalism. Okay, and the culturalism then is transformed into a kind of Chinese nationalism. In modern history, since the late 19th century, which we can understand it as a response to the Western challenges. Due to this change, the 天下, the all under the heaven concept has been replaced by the nation state idea, which means the modern China now, they are seeking to build up a strong nation state instead of 天下. So they're getting rid of the 天下 notion. Okay, so, but more importantly to me is when the national Chinese culturalism is inherited and transformed into a kind of Chinese nationalism in modern China, in modern period, this kind of hierarchy, cultural hierarchy, is also inherited. So this kind of cultural inferiority, it is kind of contradictory feelings. So on the one hand, because due to the Western humiliation in modern history, the Chinese people are feeling a sense of cultural inferiority. So their classical China culture has been, it seems to be outdated due to the Western forces. But on the other hand, they also still believe that, the classical culture, including Confucianism, it is crystallization of the universal value. It is a representation of the universal truth, which we cannot deny. So we still, this kind of cultural superiority also remains, and that remains until nowadays. I'm going to show you how it is represented in today's Chinese Confucian culture education. Particularly in the past few decades. So we have seen the economic success in China, in the East Asian countries. So that boosted the revival of Confucianism and enhances the national pride and the cultural superiority. And that's about nationalism. Cosmopolitanism, well, in this research, I understand cosmopolitanism is more in alignment, more similar to what Stoicism or Cynicism talk about when they regard cosmopolitan citizen as a subject that goes beyond the country's boundaries, right? So I take that perspective, but not exactly at them. So in terms of this, I use this term, cosmopolitan citizenship, okay, which emphasizes, as you can see here, critical self-reflection, cultural openness, empathy, and global moral responsibility. So particularly, Nussbaum contributed to the further understanding what cosmopolitanism is in terms of cosmopolitan education. But in terms of Confucianism and this relationship to cosmopolitanism, my thinking is it is more, Confucian cosmopolitanism is more rooted cosmopolitanism, which means the Confucianism embraces a kind of universal values, common humanity, but on the other hand, it is more about the local cultures. So this is why I use Appier's term here. But, from historical perspective, Confucianism is not local at all. It is cosmopolitan. We have Confucian culture circle in the East Asian countries, all right? We also have Boston Confucianism. Some Christians living in Boston, okay, they argue that they are Christians, but they are also Confucianism. They are also Christians. They are also Confucians. So Confucianism, historically, it is cosmopolitanism. And my methods, I'm going to show you one method. As I have already explained, I'm going to look at the grassroots Confucian education rather in China, but I think it would be helpful to see a bit more about Dujing education. Dujing means reading the classics. So it is it is contemporary education movement. It is still ongoing, but it has been for, the movement has been ongoing for 30 years, 3 decades. Nowadays, in terms of this movement, Dujing education, we have to mention this gentleman, whose name is Wang Caigui, from Taiwan, but promoted this kind of Confucian education or classical education, whatever the terms the people use. Wang Caigui contributed to the promotion of this classical Confucian education movement. Two data resources for me that I use in this research. One is, as I said, I'm aware of the importance of looking into what Wang Caigui means by nationalism and cosmopolitanism if I want to understand this topic. So I use Wang Caigui's writings. And the second data source is I use my fieldwork data, particularly focusing on one school. I give it a pseudonym, Yiqian School. And this school was influenced by Wang Caigui's pedagogy. I'm going to give you more details. So now here I'm going to present my findings part. So as I said, there will be 2 parts. Okay, one part is about the theoretical discourse of Dujing education in terms of Wang Caigui, how to understand nationalism and cosmopolitanism, which influenced Confucian education. Another part is my fieldwork data. Okay, in terms of the first part, I find that by the data analysis, by the discourse analysis, by critical reading Wang Caigui's text, I find that in his text, Confucianism is actually considered as the highest form of cultural and moral guidance. It is argued that Confucianism is inherited from the heaven, the Tian, as representation of the universal values and common humanity, And that is very central to the construction of Chinese identity. So I would like to report two main findings from my reading of the Confucian education theories of Wang Caigui. One is cultural hierarchy of the classics, another is urgent cultural mentality. The first one is about the cultural hierarchy of classics. So here, I give you a piece of passage from Wang Caigui's writing, where he ranks Confucian classics above all other texts and emphasizes their superior cultural and moral value. So I highlight some parts. The first two parts I highlight in red color, where Wang Caigui argued that there are four levels of classics according to Wang Caigui's ranking. The highest level is these books. They are, I want to very briefly clarify that they are the core readings of Confucianism. Yeah, we call it 四书. Okay, they are the most important books for Confucianism. Okay, the analects means yes. I want to argue that they are at the highest level, which means they have the highest level of culture value. So, which means he continues to argue that we need to read these books first, because they are of the highest value. And the second level, as you can see here, they are also considered as Confucian books, but according to Wang Caigui, they are not as important as the first level. Okay, we can read them, but not in priority. And there are third and fourth levels, but according to Wang Caigui, well, they may not be considered as the classics in a strict sense. Okay, so this is Wang Caigui's point. But my reading is not only that. It seems that Wang Caigui actually, from his text, he actually extends the cultural hierarchy. So he has established a kind of cultural hierarchy of the classics, but he also used that kind of hierarchy and apply the hierarchy to other fields. For example, he argued that the text written in vernacular Chinese, which is the modern language in China, we call it Baihuawen in Chinese. He argued that text written in vernacular Chinese is less culturally valuable than those written in classical Chinese, which was used in pre-modern China in classics. So the classics, all the classics, including Confucianism, Confucian classics, they were written by classical Chinese. So Wang Caigui argued that these texts, they have higher level of cultural values than the text written in vernacular Chinese. In addition to that, he continued to argue that he applied the classical hierarchy, the cultural hierarchy, if you want to use that broad term. He continued to argue that the Chinese class culture is deep and difficult, whereas the Western modern culture, which refers more to the scientific culture, the science from the West, they're shallow and easy to learn. So I share one piece of passage from Wang Caigui's writing. So I just pay attention to the part on the line. So where Wang Caigui argued the responsibility for global cultural integration lies with Chinese people, not the Westerns, because the Western modern culture is easy to learn, but Confucian classical Chinese classical culture, it is profound, it is deep, it is not easy to learn. So it is Chinese people who undertake the responsibility to what? To promote the integration of Western and Chinese culture and create a common human civilization. I told you that I use two data resources, right? So in terms of in alignment with what Wang Caigui argued, I look at, the Confucian education practitioners and how they use that kind of discourse to understand the culture in China, the Chinese culture and the Western culture, as well as their relationship. So Mr. Chen is the head teacher of Eton School, where I did my field work. Actually, you can see here the very similar arguments presented here. Mr. Chen argued that the Western science, the modern Western science culture, okay, it is objective, it is knowledge-based, it is very easy to learn. A very similar statement. But the Chinese classical culture, it is non-objective, it is wisdom-based, and therefore it is difficult to grasp. And this point is linked to the universal values of human nature. Mr. Chen and Wang Caigui, both of them, not only Mr. Chen, but many other people who follow Wang Caigui, okay, they have the same statement that Chinese classical culture is the representation, crystallization of universal values of human nature, which is more, lying at the high level. And this reinforces, as I read it, reinforces the belief in Chinese cultural superiority, which is inherited from the Chinese culturalism. Okay, so here is a piece of passage. It's from my interview with Mr. Chen, where Mr. Chen argued that, just look how easy it is for Chinese people to learn geometry. But imagine how difficult it would be for a Westerner to learn the Tao Te Ching, which is Daoism, a classic of Daoism, and the analogs of Confucius. He continued to ask, what culture is superior? Chinese culture. Chinese people can learn two things together, which referring to Western science and Chinese classics, but Westerners cannot. This is what Mr. Chen argued. It's very similar statement. And this passage is from Wang Caigui again, which is very interesting. Wang Caigui used two concepts. One concept is westernizing, 西化, which means to westernize oneself. Okay, so this echoes what China experienced since the late 19th century. Okay, where the Chinese intellectuals, they were eager to learn the Western democracy, Western science to build up a very strong modern state. So this is what it means. So he argued that 西化 means westernizing, means forgetting and denying oneself and turning oneself to be like the West. So you lost your subjectivity, cultural subjectivity. However, once I continue to argue that we may prefer the another term, transforming the West, 化西. So that means to achieve a robust self and through one's efforts to digest the West to enrich one's life. So he argued that to transform the West, what is used to transform the West? He does not explain that, but it seems that the classical culture from China, the Chinese classical culture, which is regarded as the crystallization of universal values, should be used to transform the West. I think this is what they argue that. Okay, I talk about the cultural hierarchy of classics and how to use the hierarchy, to apply this hierarchy to other, by creating the dualism, the dualist terms. This is the second finding from my reading of Wang Caigui's text. So it's about an urgent cultural mentality. I think this part is more important. So basically, this means, according to Wang Caigui, 读经 or reading the classics. He argued that in the past over 100, Chinese culture, classical culture has been damaged because of the Western forces. So, and the Chinese people has lost their cultural identity, which is linked to the classical culture. So that means in contemporary China, Chinese people, according to Wang Caigui, it is necessary for the people to start reading classics. But in what way to memorize classics? To memorize classics as early as possible, ideally before the age of 13. So this is where the classical education encourages the education to start from the children. So it's called the children's classics reading education, something like that. 儿童读经教育 in Chinese. Okay, so in that way, we can be a true Chinese. The contemporary Chinese people, they don't read classics according to Wang Saigui. But in order to become a genuine, authentic Chinese people, we really need to understand Chinese classics, Confucianism included. So this is the way he argued. And even he promoted this pure classics reading model. It may be weird to many people, even weird to me, but this is what he argued for. He argued that in order to, establish or re-establish the national identity by reviving the classical culture, Confucian classics, the children should memorize how many? 300,000 words of classics, including 20,000 in Chinese and 100,000 in foreign languages, maybe English, maybe in Germany. But all these words are referred to the classics. Okay, for example, in the English classics, maybe children should read Plato or Aristotle or Shakespeare. Okay, so this is what it means. How long? Ideally, it should be one child should be reading classics 8 hours one day and should last for 10 years. Maybe not enough, according to Wang Saigui. So in that way, children would become this. Oh yeah, I mentioned that in another slide. Would become a great cultural talent. I will explain it later. So this is the criteria for children to become a great cultural talent. Of course, this is a response to the modern rejection of Confucianism, as I already explained. So to revive Chinese or Confucian culture is a way to rebuild Chinese national identity, national cultural identity. So this is about the cosmopolitanism part from my reading of the text of Wang Saigui. So it's quite interesting to talk about this part. I have talked about the nationalism, the culturalism or Chinese nationalism, my reading of Wang Saigui. But in this part, we can see Wang Saigui's understanding of classics or Confucian classics, Confucianism. It is not parochial nationalism. It is actually open up to embrace other cultures. So he argued that reviving classics, 读经 education, it is not about, the aim of it is not that China is to dominate the world, just like the colonizers in the West did. This is my point, not Wang Saigui argued that. Wang Saigui rarely talk about colonialism. Instead, the aim of reviving 读经 education is to foster global cultural exchanges. So he continued to argue that. So why children should read classics? That is because I already repeat that point. Classics, according to Wang Saigui, they originate from common humanity. So all people, regardless of their ethnicity, nationality, all people, they share the common humanity. And classics should be the crystallization of universal wisdom and shared values beyond national ethnic boundaries. So this is classics. So we have Chinese classics, we have maybe Greek classics, we may have other classics, but all these classics, they share the same feature here. So we should take action. What kind of action? That is to read classics. But that kind of action should, according to Wang Caigui, should originate from one's conscious, 良知. That means you need to, it's moral awareness. He requests all people to ask yourself about your educational experience. Is that kind of education the education that you really want? Do you think is the education you received has some problems? Or what kind of education really want to pursue? Okay, if your answer is, well, I want my children, I want myself to pursue the education, classical education that is able for me to associate me with the common humanity of the human civilization. If this is your answer, you should start reading classics. Yeah, as I said, doing education because of the cosmopolitanist orientation, doing education actually promotes an open, inclusive approach to integrate diverse cultures into a shared human civilization. So this is the basic point. And he continued to argue that, in order, he does not deny the Western science culture. Instead, he argued that in order to cultivate holistic mind, okay, we need to integrate the Chinese classical cultures and Western scientific culture, because both of them are important. But don't forget, there's actually a cultural hierarchy. There's a kind of a ranking. This is what I mentioned. Is 文化大才, or great cultural talents. So Wang Caigui really want to cultivate this kind of people, subjects, use the word. So this is the criteria he has set up for a person to become a great cultural talent. Actually, it is not only this criteria. He argued that this is only the baseline for a person to become a great cultural talent, which means if you successfully recognize 300,000 words of classics, you have the potential to become great cultural talents. This is what I argue. So that means, so what kind of great cultural talent? Wang Caigui explained that, this kind of person, they are someone who embodies both Confucian or Chinese and Western wisdom, who takes responsibility for cultural transmissions and integration, and they are expected to lead Confucian revival efforts while maintains a global vision. So he and his followers emphasize the integration of Chinese and Western cultures, 中西汇通. This is the key point there. Not only that, in terms of the great cultural talents, the term Wang Caigui also redefined the Confucian 儒者. So I underline part of this passage. So what is Confucian, according to Wang Caigui, in contemporary Chinese context? He argued that it believes all knowledge has its value and should be given due respect, and it hopes everything under heaven is in its proper place. Such learning is called Confucianism, 儒家, and those who pursue this kind of learning and life is called Confucians. I continue to argue that the people who are eager to who look forward to the sagehood, who look forward to pursue the Confucian, to become Confucianism or sages or 君子, a superior person, the person should undertake the Confucian aspirations. So here I underline part of it, but basically this kind of Confucian aspirations, according to Wang Caigui, actually is there is a very specific indication. That is, the people should get involved in the classical education promotion, contributing to the revival of Confucian education and Chinese education, Chinese classical education. Yeah, this my point. I argue that according to my reading of Wang Caigui, actually it has been. He is arguing that we need to cultivate the Confucian cosmopolitan citizens. So what is that? So my reading of it is this is my interpretation. The cosmopolitan citizen, according to the theory contributed by Wang Caigui, it is a cultural subject rather than political subject. The feature of it is to grasp, to master Chinese and Western classics. And this subject, cosmopolitan citizen, they should undertake the dual missions. One is to preserve Chinese culture, another is to engage in global integration. So it's open-minded, integrating Chinese and Western culture. And reading the classics. So it is here I argue that it should be understood both as a practice of self-cultivation as well as a civic action. But this kind of civic action is taking place in a private, in private sphere, because reading classics is always an individual private individual action that takes place in private environment. Maybe this is here we may link to what Brian Turner argued. Maybe it's about their private citizens. 2 minutes left. In addition to Wang Zaigui's text, my next presentation is more about what am I going to present next is about what I observed from my fieldwork, from my schools. Okay. So this school, ASEN school, they actually, this school, they had contributed very similar statements as Wang Zaigui. They inherited what Wang Zaigui said. They inherited Wang Zaigui's classical pedagogy. So here is, I will show you some data, some evidence. So this school, ASEN school, identifies itself as a place. Yeah, here there is a cosmopolitan orientation of this school. This school is located in a remote countryside place, okay, but it has a global awareness by arguing that people who come here learn. We have students to come to our school to learn classics, and that means our school is not only to be a local school. We are going to be a place where the global and the local should be connected. So I highlight some keywords in red. So the school, for example, the school aims to become a global base for learning Chinese culture, something like that. And here the school also used the cosmopolitan citizens directly. This is the term from the school, the Confucian school. But he defined cosmopolitan citizens as someone who masters the knowledge of Chinese and Western cultures. How the school cultivates national identity and cosmopolitan identity, this is what I'm going to show you. Who is saying? It's very nice. My report is, in this school, the school argued that students should have national identity as well as global consciousness. They use Chinese classics to foster students' national identity and English classics to develop their cosmopolitan outlook. You will find this story very interesting. Reading the classics for honesty and extensively is the basic method within the school that is used to cultivate students' national identity. That means students need to, it is alignment with what Wang Zaigui argued for the criteria to become a great cultural talent. In order to cultivate children educate children to become great cultural talent, the children should read classics honestly and extensively. So that means students, every student, they are primary school, okay, they are students within primary school, they should learn and read and memorize classics 4 to 5 hours one day. And that they use the text, the classical text, written in classical Chinese, and there's no commentary or vernacular translation. So that means students, it's not hard to imagine that students don't understand the text at all. They don't understand them. But Wang Zaigui and the school argue that students don't need to waste time to understand. They just read and memorize. That's it. They argue students to make their own personal study plans to achieve this goal, reading classics honestly and extensively, and the teacher would, check their recitation, memorization every day. They even argue that students should read the whole book, which is called Baoben, the full book recitation. So that means, students must memorize, recite the whole book, classic book. For example, the Analects of Confucius, not in one breath, but very friendly. Yeah. Maybe students may be given about 2 or 3 prompts of the whole book. The whole book is how many words in the Analects? 10,000 words. Students need to recite that fluently. Students recently recorded on video CDs, and the video CDs were sent to the parents. Okay. But students, some students, they find that the memorization, the rote memorization is boring, exhausting, and this way of learning classics may damage their eyesight and voice. And that some teachers in my field work, they also complain that, this kind of overemphasis on rote learning, they don't like that. They think that is meaningless. Instead, they are advocate for more ritual practice and individualized talent development. But unfortunately, during my field work, I did my field work many years ago. During that time, the school this kind of voices were marginalized. They were not taken seriously in the school. But later, if we have time, I will talk about what happened recently. And in the school, they also cultivate the cosmopolitan awareness. As I said, they encourage students to learn English classics. What they learn is this: English masterpiece selection. They learn Socrates, they learn Plato, they learn Shakespeare's plays. Yeah, this is what they learn. But the process is very, very slow. They encourage students to learn Chinese classics very fast, as more as possible. But for the English classics, it's very slow. Yeah. How slow was it? Well, I observed a couple of classes in the field. The students spent 1 month learning only one sentence, in English sentence from Plato's essay. 1 month learning only one sentence. But the teacher, Mr. Mo, emphasized English should be working as a bridge to spread Chinese culture globally. So the students are not learning language, English as a language. They are learning the culture. Again, mechanical repetition. It was the main method. It is the main method, just like students used to learn Chinese classics. So they use the same method to learn English classics. So the students listen to audio recording and repeat the sentences over hundreds of times. This is how they learn English. Again, the same as the Chinese classics, there were no explanations no translations of the English text. But students, that's very, very interesting. Students can memorize and recite the English text very fast, fluently, very fast, but they just don't understand what it means. It's true. And students struggle with the pronunciation. So yeah, this is no alteration of rhyme, no accentual rising, falling, or stress. And students' recitation of the English text is lack of clarity too. You just can't recognize what they are memorized, what they are reciting. They don't understand it. Very quick summary. Yeah, we can see Dujian education integrates nationalism and cosmopolitanism. I acknowledge that these two kind of ideologies, they are there. They are interweaving there. But we can very easily find that there's a tension. Okay, so it aims to the Dujian education, Confucian classical education. It aims to cultivate great cultural talents. Okay, which is used to redefine what Confucian is. And we can see, as I said in the very beginning, is from the Chinese culturalism. So that Chinese culturalism seems to be transformed. This is what I realized when I'm preparing this. This slide, I think, is very interesting. the Chinese culturalism, on the one hand, it has been transformed to cultural nationalism. Many scholars argue this already. So I unpack it by presenting the two things from my reading of Wang Zaigui's text. But Chinese culturalism is also transformed into or influenced what cosmopolitanism is in Confucianism, in Confucian classical education. We really need to rethink nationalism and cosmopolitanism in today's grassroots Confucian education. So on the one hand, we should acknowledge the two things. They are there, but on the other hand, there is always some challenges against cosmopolitanism, particularly. So Confucian education. Here I make a point argument that we may link what I find here with some arguments contributed by some philosophers, Western philosophers, such as Nussbaum, who argue about the cosmopolitan ideals or cosmopolitan education, something like that. I think Confucian education shares something common with the cosmopolitan education argued by Nussbaum. This is my point. So Confucian cosmopolitanism, they embrace global cultural integration and maintain the national identity. But what I really want to emphasize here is there is some challenge against Confucian cosmopolitanism because of the Chinese culturalism. The Chinese culturalism and its modern form, cultural nationalism, they create hierarchy, a cultural hierarchy. That kind of hierarchy aims to rank Confucian tradition above Western science culture. Okay, so it creates a cultural hierarchy, and that kind of cultural hierarchy, it means that when we're talking about Confucian cosmopolitanism, that kind of cultural hierarchy is inherited. That means Confucian cosmopolitanism is struggling with cultural superiority narratives. It always has to struggle with, well, Confucian Chinese culture, classical culture has high value, which we should learn in priority, whereas the Western science culture is maybe, it still has values, but not as much value as classical culture. We need to learn that, but not in priority, something like that. This kind of cultural value hierarchy, we really need to be aware. So I even argue that there is a risk of cultural nationalism maybe overpowering cosmopolitanism. I acknowledge the cosmopolitanist orientation in Confucian classic education, but this kind of memorization-based pedagogy, okay, it is considered to be the central teaching and learning method, but faces critical difficulties in balancing rote learning and meaningful engagement, particularly this urgent cultural mentality. Okay, in order to cultivate students to become great cultural talents, students are required, even by force, maybe for the children, they have to sit there for 4 to 5 hours one day memorizing classics, learning by rote learning, without understanding what the text means. So nowadays the national citizenship still dominates the education discourse. So maybe this is the background where I linked with. However, the urgency to revive Chinese culture can lead to rational, emotional nationalism, mixing cultural pride with insecurity. This, when we are looking at the case of Confucian classical education and regarded with a broader picture that we are experiencing in China, where, the national rejuvenation, the China dream, something like that. So that kind of cultural superiority mentality plays a role to create people's understanding of the world and itself. Yeah, so what's the future of the Confucian education in China? I'm still doing the research and collected new data. I'm still analyzing the data to see how it happened. I'm aware of my limited time, so we may discuss it in the next part. This is me. Yeah, this is me in 2019. Yeah, many years, 5 or 6 years Yeah, if you're interested in, just scan the barcode. I created the barcode, QR code. You can download the slides. Yeah, it's free. Yeah, that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we will now open the floor for questions and comments. If you are joining us online, you can type your question in the chat, raise your hand to indicate you would like to join in, or if you're joining us on YouTube, you can put your comments there and they will be fed to us by our friends and colleagues at ASEN. So who would like to start us off with questions today? Oh boy, okay, let's start.
Thank you. I mean, I found this particularly relevant because I did experience that sort of education when I was a child. and I'm sort of curious that have you done any like follow-up? Like, did this sort of Confucianist cosmopolitan citizenship actually be succeeded among the students?
Do I need to answer directly, or are we going to collect? Yeah. You mean the children?
Yes, yes.
Yes and no. Yeah, some students, currently I'm collecting data with the children who have already grown up. Even in their 30s now. Some of them, and some of them in 20s, and they seem to be very firm to undertake the Confucian aspirations clarified by Wang Zaigui to promote the Confucian culture, regardless of the realistic limitations. They may have not that good job making money, but they argue that we should learn Yan Hui or Yan Yuan, right? Who is very poor, but in a very morally superior stance. Some of them. But on the other hand, many students they just leave Confucian classical education after reading a couple of years. As I said, some students felt bored. They may forgo the text they memorize. Even damage their physical damage to their eyesight or voices. So many students left. So they just, where did they go? They went back to the state education, the public schools. The grassroots Confucian education, they are the private schools using the very different curriculum from the public school. So many students just went back.
Take the next question in the room and then we'll go to the chat. So let's go here. Yes.
Hi, thank you for this talk. I personally find it really fascinating about the stratification of this Chinese classics or classical literature that you've mentioned proposed by Wang Zaigui. So which leads to a couple of questions I've got. So most commonly in contemporary mainland China, or at least in the Northwest where I'm from. So as we know, textbooks and education vary a lot in different regions in China. So we are actually, as I grew up, we are more taught with the third level of literature that you mentioned.
Which was regarded not as classics by Wang Zaigui.
The Tao and so on poems and the Yuan verses. Yeah. So I was wondering, how does this discrepancy might or intersect with the shaping of Chinese identity and nationalism? And also, what do you think, what role do you think this stratification of literature or Chinese classics may sort of take in helping to shape the social class structure within China? Because we've mentioned without China, especially since now educational status is strongly promoted by national policies in China and closely linked with one's social status as well. So these were just a couple of questions.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Many parents, their children, they may ask their children to read classics, maybe in full-time schools, classical schools. My fieldwork revealed that many of them, they're from the urban middle-class families. But this is one thing, considering their social background. But on the other hand, when they are learning Confucianism, they argue that Confucianism is kind of education that goes beyond the societal factors or restrictions. Whatever that means, whatever social class you come from, whatever, whether you're poor or wealthy or rich or whatever you're male or female or whatever this, you are still, if you ask your conscientious, am I looking forward to the universal values and shared humanity? Am I eager to learn something that is universal, learn the universal values? Classics are there waiting for you. So it is the right time. When you're asking that, it is the right time for you to engage in the reading classics, regardless of your social class or something like that. So this is what they argue that. So some students, some parents, some students' family background, they're very, very a lot. Many of them from the middle class, according to their maybe income level, something like that. But many of them, they are just do some very ordinary jobs. They're maybe some of them are from the rural society. And all of them, they all believe that as individual who are looking forward to the learning of the sage, we are equal. We are at the same point to learn about the classics, to be educated, cultivated by the sage, by the Confucian teachings. So no matter you are poor or wealth. Yeah, this is one. What's the first question?
Sorry, so the first question, the first question was about the discrepancy between the third level and the first level.
Oh yeah, Wang Zaihui said, the third level we use, in public schools in China, we use the third or even the fourth level text, the primers. Okay, we call it primers. The third level, we call it primers to educate children. Wang Zaihui said, well, they are not classics. Why? This is his classification, but the point is why he made that kind of classification. Because he argued that Chinese culture, Confucian culture, has been damaged for centuries. In the past over 1 century, it is really important and necessary for us to read the most important classics as much as possible. So in that way, we can cultivate Confucian great cultural talents who may undertake the mission of reviving classical culture. So this is the basic his logic. So because here he has created a kind of time a narrative of the imminence of reading classics. So he argued that we must cultivate our children within a very short of time, 10 years, according to his definition, to cultivate them to become someone who are able to read Confucian, Chinese, and Western classics. So that is the hope for Chinese people, for China to revive Chinese classical culture, and then to save the world. So this is basically his point. So in that case, we don't have to start from the level 3 or level 4, which was from the highest level classics from Confucius and the likes, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Why don't we look at some of the questions from the chat? So the first one that's been waiting for us for some time is about how successful the introduction of English masterpieces or classics have been. Maybe Shakespeare, as well as ancient Greeks. So there's that question. There's also a question from Peaks about why it's Western science as the boogeyman who's instead of capitalism. We always count on Peaks for a nice provocative question. And then we also have asking about aspects of Confucian cultural classics reinforcing the state's paternalistic role over people. How can we balance the influence of such content with that of common humanity? How can we understand the tension between them? So these are from the chat so far. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. The first question, I don't think it's helpful. It's successful. I don't think. As I said, my observations of the English teaching class within the school, they spent 1 month, all children were reciting only one English sentence. without an understanding of it. Is that successful? No.
They didn't make them do the ancient Greek thing.
Yeah, this is what they are doing now. That's very interesting. Yeah, currently, Wang Caigui and some of his followers currently, they are recruiting students to learn Sanskrit, to learn Greek philosophy, to learn some Western classics, maybe in Italy. There's academy in Italy. The students were recruited and spent maybe one semester or a year studying there. So this is one ambitious project to cultivate, again, the great cultural talents who should not only be knowledgeable of Chinese classics, but also the Western classics. So this is what they are continuing to do that. They are doing that. Yeah. As I talk about in this case, it is not successful at all. Yeah, the students just forget everything they memorize. Yeah. Instead, the science. Well, they talk about science. Once I talk about science, his followers, such as Mr. Chen, talk about science. But when they are talking about science, it's very interesting. Their narrative is something like, well, I'm talking about science, but I'm not talking about science per se. I'm talking about science because I really need to prove that science is less culturally valuable than Chinese classical culture. So they actually build up a kind of dualist structure. One end is the Western science, another is the Chinese classical culture. On the other hand, as I said, they argue that the science is something that children should learn because the science teach people the logic. I don't know if you agree with that. They teach logic. They help people to think, critical thinking, and think in a logic way. So in that way, the science is needed for children to learn, but still with less cultural value. Yeah, shall we? I'm not sure if I have answered that question. Yeah, this sounds like a misconception. Yeah, definitely, I think. Yeah, but the discourse here, if we regard their narratives about science not as the words that reflect the essence of science, but instead as a discourse. Yeah, discourse of science. You can understand what I'm talking about. Thank you. Some aspect people. The Wang Caigui and his followers who are engaged in the Confucian education, they rarely talk about the state, but they are always in the state power and how it influenced the Confucian culture. But they are always involved in the relationship with the state power because many students who study Confucian classics within the full-time school, they come from state education. So that means they always have to face a kind of institutional restrictions that it is very self-contradictory. On the one hand, they believe that the state education is not the education they expect. It's not the ideal education they expect. So because of that, they really need to find alternative form of education, which means getting the children out of the state education and study Confucianism within the Confucian education school. So this is one thing. On the other hand, they argue that the state is promoting the Confucian culture, as part of the national rejuvenation and Confucianism, Confucian culture, pride. We as Chinese people, we need to be proud that we have the classics. So for the parents, they argue that, that's really nice, very, very excellent that my children are learning classics. So they may be in the advantageous position than their peers because they have learned classics. But as I said, these parents and their children, they are very struggling. When I responded to your question, after classical, learning classics of a couple of years, they just go back to the public school, the state school. So there are different levels to understand this issue. So from the cultural value, they argue that the classical education, Confucian education is at the cultural superiority position. On the other hand, they have to go back to the state school, maybe for the degree or diploma, in order to get promoted to the higher level of education. So a lot of things, complicating issues here.
Back to the room. Jinyu, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering, you talk a lot about what's Wang Caigui and his followers' view, and the whole time I was wondering what is your view? Towards the end, you kind of hinted, you seem quite critical of the hierarchy of knowledge, right? But I think a lot of things that Wang Caigui mentioned seems very problematic for me. For example, there's universal truth, and there's objective knowledge, and also the hierarchy of knowledge. And also it tends to present a very essentialized version of what is China. So China is the core cultural identity is Confucianism. But what about, for example, the ethnic minority groups, for which Confucianism was never part of their culture? So do you think this kind of portrayed risk essentializing what is Chinese and also essentializing what is Western? Because all the classes they mentioned are based on American or European classics. So when they talk about cosmopolitan, it seems that they equals cosmopolitanism with Western and also with European American. So I was just wondering what your view on all this.
Wang Caigui really talk about ethnicity issues. Yeah, he never talk about many Confucians from the Confucian philosophy. They don't talk about Han, non-Han, that kind of relation, never. But that does not mean there's no some kind of, as some scholars argue, maybe the Confucianism is an ideology that is centered, Han-centered ideology, something like that. My research is not, does not explore in that direction. But my point is, from the cosmopolitanist orientation, from the theory and the practice, Wang Caigui does not reject that kind of, the ethnic minorities should, I think he should accept the proposal that the ethnic minorities should learn classics, Confucian classics, as long as they are aware that, classics are from the common values, the shared humanity. In that case, the ethnic minorities should learn classics too. Yeah, this is not a unique point at all. In history, according to Confucian philosophy, we can see many evidence about that. So in Confucian philosophy, Confucianism, we talk about Wen and Zhi. I don't want to use the civilized or barbarian concept because that's maybe not suitable to Chinese context. But Confucius himself really argue that if someone is different from our culture, and it is valuable, it is necessary for the civilized groups to teach them and educate them and to transform their culture. This is something Confucius argued. So that kind of point, we can find that point here. But as I said, Wang Caigui already talked about. I'd like to give you one that's very interesting, one point. Wang Caigui established one academy, a Confucian academy, in one rural inner village of Shezu. It's an ethnic minority place. Yeah, the Shezu is the main part of population living in the village, and he established his academy there. Yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question. Maybe not.
Could I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please. Yes, please help me.
I was also wondering, do they talk about the gender issue at all? Because lots of our students, when they talk about gender roles, they always go, oh, this is traditional Chinese gender role because of Confucianism. So women are supposed to stay at home, women inside the household.
Not really.
So all these schools of Dujing schools, do they talk about the gender issue?
Wang Caigui has no, he really talked about the gender and how gender may influence the people to become sages or in Wang Caigui's academy and in the school where I did my field work, there are boys and girls there, and some girls even, they share their ideas, opinions about learning classics. So they all believe that, they all believe that boys and girls, women, men, maybe, they all have the potential to become sages. Okay, so I don't argue that Confucianism is not encouraging the kind of gender division. I'm not arguing that, but I think this kind of idea is from Wang Yangming, a Confucian philosopher lived in Ming Dynasty about 600 years ago, who argued that everyone in the world has the potential to become sages. So he inherited points from there. Many girls in the Confucian Academy and in the Confucian school, they learn stages. On the other hand, this is about the ideology, about the theoretical discourse. But in the practice, in my observation of the school, the boys were taught with some masculinity virtues, maybe. They were told to become more brave when they are facing some challenges in their study, whereas girls, although they may be encouraged to become more brave, but the girls may be taught with more maybe femininity virtues, to become more tolerant of the suffering in their life. There's something about that, like that, within the school. But in the theoretical discourse, we cannot find too much about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Yes, please. Yes. Not in
please.
in the back. We'll go to you.
Sorry. I have two questions. Firstly, for your research, have you ever thought about interview Wang Caigui himself for your research? Because I think large of your construction of Confucianism relies on Wang Caigui.
Yeah. I met him a couple of times.
Okay. Because I know Wen Lishuyan quite well as well. I can recite 4 books as well. And also the second question is, to what extent do you think that the Confucianism you sort of presented represents, this whole movement represents Wang Caigui implementing his teacher Mo Zongsan's theory into practice? It's not necessarily a revival of Confucianism, but the reinvention of a tradition, because today we tend to call his teacher and his teacher's teacher as the Confucian iconoclasm, like the iconoclasm within Confucianism. They completely brought down what is Confucianism before and reconstructed it. Like his teacher was a Kantian philosopher.
Yeah.
So to what extent do you think that is the sort of his implementation of his teacher's thought rather than sort of a revival of Confucianism? Also, like, he's a very interesting character because he's from Taiwan and he's not even immigrated from Taiwan, from the mainland. His roots is in Taiwan.
Yeah.
And also he recites the classic in Ming dialect, in the Taiwanese dialect. I know he quite enjoying reciting classic in the Taiwanese dialect instead of using Mandarin.
Indeed.
So I think he's quite an interesting character you might want to interview and do the project on. And also, like, what do you think of this project as sort of his implementation of his teacher's thought rather than Confucianism in general?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, your question reminds me my encounter with Wang Caigui a couple of years ago in Qufu. We had a talk, we had a forum there in 2017. Once we reported his ideas, actually reiterated his ideas about Confucian education, which to me very the same as what he wrote in the text. So yeah, I met him a couple of times in other occasions, but I had a talk with him, but he argued that what I want to say has been said. I have talked about the Confucian classical education very clearly. If you don't understand me, please read my text. Yeah, this is what he said. But this is one thing. Another thing is, as you know, why Wang Caigui? Yeah, Wang Caigui is teacher. Xian Sheng is Mou Zongsan. Mou Zongsan has contributed a creative contribution to the Chinese philosophy by linking Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, Buddhism with Confucian philosophy, etc. But my point is, what I'm interested in is why people are attracted to learn Mou Zongsan. Yeah, at the moment, some people they get together to learn Mou Zongsan. For example, 生命的学问, the knowledge of life. A text written by Mou Zongsan, a book written by Mou Zongsan. A moral metaphysics, which is a bit more difficult to understand, contributed by Mou Zongsan. People are learning that. But people are learning that they are, as I said, they are ordinary people. They are not the professional philosopher. They have the professional philosophy training. They are, just ordinary people. But they learn this kind of text. Yeah, currently I'm doing a research project about that. My initial finding is, I'd like to share that with you. People are learning Mou Zongsan not for the knowledge itself. It's for the understanding of their life. They use Mou Zongsan text to reflect upon what they experienced in their actual life. They even emphasize that we cannot take Mou Zongsan's text as philosophical knowledge. If you read Mou Zongsan's text, that's the wrong way. You should not do that way. Instead, you should understand Mou Zongsan's text as a guidance, as a moral life guidance to help you rethink what you experienced in actual life, to cultivate your morality, to be kind to people. So it's a knowledge of life. So they understand that way. So more broadly, that is about religiosity. This is what I'm writing about. It is very arguable that is Confucianism is Confucianism as a religion. I refer to Peng Guoxiang, which is a Confucian philosopher working in Zhejiang University. He argued that we should understand Confucianism as between humanity and religion or religiosity. So if we take the religious perspective to understand how and why people are learning Mou Zongsan, I think that's understandable. They take Mou Zongsan's text, a philosophical text, as some kind of religious reading, okay? Associating the text with their life to find out some maybe truth of their self. Yeah.
We have time for one more short question. So in the back, it's your moment.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my question is, so you mentioned Wang's academy in the Shizhou district in Taifun, right, in Zhejiang, which is, in my opinion, hardly by any sense actually really a true representative of cosmopolitanism in China at this moment. And Wang's pedagogy probably relied heavily on this kind of artificial distancing between China's metropolises and his own academy. And as you mentioned, a lot of students were indeed from an urban middle class background. I may wonder about their reception of this kind of pedagogy, but beyond that, in this kind of scenario, if even spatial cosmopolitanism is not guaranteed, why would you still abide by this kind of study of cosmopolitanism as the central methodology or the central concept you are going to work on in the project?
Yeah, thank you. I think this very interesting question reminds me of what I mentioned in the last piece of slide. Why that happened? I think what is behind us is still the urgent mentality to revive Confucian culture or Chinese culture. So even though, I acknowledge that the Orientalism of Confucian classical education. It is there. Even nowadays, they are doing some kind of cosmopolitan projects, asking students to learn Sanskrit, for example. But the urgent mentality behind it is still there and very, very strong until nowadays. And that is linked to the general context that China is reviving, not only as economic power, but also a cultural power, something like that. Children and their parents believe that is, if they believe in the truth of classics, they believe they have the responsibility, cultural responsibility to do something, that is to read classics, and that will be helpful. That will be helpful to revive Confucian and the Chinese classics. So and this is why I want to argue that behind the cosmopolitanism, there's always urgent cultural, urgent mentality that promotes those people and children and parents and teachers to promote Confucian education, and that maybe damaging, maybe overpowering, damaging the cosmopolitanist orientation. I'm concerned about that. Particularly when I observe many children, they just got bored and even got bored of the study, Confucian study, just left the school. That kind of cases. So this is my feeling. I hope my feeling is wrong, but unfortunately, at the moment, Confucian classical education, they are facing a lot of challenges within their pedagogical principle. Yeah, but they don't think it is a case. They believe their pedagogy is perfect. Their pedagogy has taught everything. If you don't understand, please read the text. But my analysis, my point is, yes, there is an internal philosophical tension behind it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Before we close the session, I just wanted to mention that we are meeting again next week. The next talk is same time, but not the same place. So we will be meeting in the practice room next week at 4 o'clock on Wednesday to hear Stella. I'm not even going to try to say the Greek name. Talk about childhood disability, social class, and pathways of disadvantage. So I hope to see you there. And please join me in thanking Kang Long Wang for coming all this way and giving us this very fascinating talk.
Thank you very much.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good.
How are you?
谢谢东伟，谢谢这个你的问题。他们在无形问题上很讨论。